Hey, everybody, welcome back to the weekly History Chaos podcast, episode 6. I want to tell everybody if it's checking this back out again, thank you. We got an exciting episode today, more topics. Still going into World War II, but good news next week, I'm pretty sure I'm going to do World War One. I've been building up a topic list and kind of taking some time to study some stuff that I might not know as well as I think I do just to make sure. But yeah, so World War One is coming up pretty soon because there's a lot of things that interest me in that time period. And honestly, I know so much about World War Two, but I don't really know as much about World War One. And I guess to me, understanding World War One would help me understand World War Two even better. So I'm excited to learn that. Uh, but yeah, so stay tuned for the next episode after this one. But other than that, let's get episode 6 started with our first topic of the day. And yes, we're back to drawing topics again. I know last time I didn't really draw a topic, so let's see here. Our first topic of today is USSR expansion before WW2 and after WW2. So let's put it this way. Yes, the Soviet Union, the USSR, did they have a lot of losses in World War II? Yes. Did they fight Germany and everything else? Yes, they contributed, but did they also gain a lot from the war? Absolutely. I mean, they gained a bunch. Um, on top of this, the Lend-Lease program and things like that. I mean, they were given a lot of stuff, which means that they could reverse re-engineer. They got technological insights and things like that. So that's one thing. And they were also given like trade materials and things like that. So there was a lot of things that the USSR got beneficial from that. But on top of that, whenever they expanded, so they had 2 expansion periods. So they expanded once at the start of World War II before Germany actually declared war on them. And they used Germany to expand. So what they did was, they got half of Poland. They got the eastern Poland area. They got Romania, parts of Romania, uh, Bisbarbia. I'm going to pronounce it wrong, but they got like the northeastern part of Romania, Bukovina, kind of like the northern part of that part, toward kind of like Czechoslovakia kind of region, the tail end of it. So they got some of that. They had a war with Finland, and they actually ended up getting land from it. So they got land from Finland, some key areas. They also took, I'm going to pronounce these wrong. I kind of practiced earlier. Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. So they took all 3 of them, and those 3 were actually, I mean, they declared, they took those 3. Okay, so Finland was war, so they had the Winter War with Finland, and they took land from Finland. But the other 3 that I just named off, excuse me. So the other 3 that I just named off, they took them through threat of war. So they pretty much told them that, either they were going to surrender and they were going to take the land, they were going to take their nations, or they were going to have their 100,000 army strong force across the border, and it's going to be a war. And obviously those nations just surrendered. I mean, they really didn't have a choice. They could not stand up to, the Soviet Union at the time. And because of Germany, they didn't have any backing on the, world scale of it. If anything, Germany would have probably backed them. But again, they're kind of stuck between 2 evils. There's not really much they can do. And let me make sure I got all the lands there. Yeah, so that's all the major ones they took. So they took those before they went to war with Germany. Now, when Germany went to war with them, Germany took back a lot of those lands. Obviously, Germany pushed really deep into, the Soviet Union, Russia, and they got to, Moscow and Stalingrad and things like that. So they retook back all those lands that I've mentioned here that the USSR took in the beginning. So they took all those lands back, obviously pillaged, terrible stuff, lots of war crimes, terrible things happened. And then on the way back through, when the USSR pushed the Germans back, the Soviet Union got to take those lands back again. So yeah, I feel bad, but there's a lot of like, I don't know, there's a lot of war crimes that happened around that point, a lot of death, a lot of fatality. Civilians were very much caught in the crossfire of that. And, these armies have been like in a brutal death match with each other. I mean, they just didn't treat anyone they ran into very kindly. So I feel sorry for anyone who had to live in those countries in that time period. That's kind of how they took those lands back. Now, post World War II, taking full advantage of the fact that the USSR has pushed all the way to Berlin and they captured all this land. Also, that the Allies don't want to continue a war. I mean, like the Allies didn't want to have a reason to continue the war or to fight Soviet Union. I mean, they have a very large army, large force. Would the Allies eventually won? Possibly, but it would have been such a bloody conflict, and they knew it. And the Soviet Union have so much power at that point, they just wanted to end it. So that's pretty much how at the end of World War II, they pretty much got to claim Hungary, Romania, Bulgaria, Czechoslovakia, Yugoslavia, Albania, Eastern Germany, East Germany. And then they got some lands too. They got Austrian lands. Oh gosh, Austrian lands. They took lands from northern Iran, northern Norway. There's like some Denmark islands. They took some Denmark islands. Manchuria, they got some lands. Korea, they were there for a while. They actually tried to set up that communist government in Korea, which led to the Korean War and stuff like that. But, bad news. And they even took the Kuril Islands from Japan. So they took quite a bit of land overall, and they really expanded their influence. That's the reason why it led to the Cold War. They took a large amount of land at the end of World War II. So did the USSR have a lot of losses? Yes. Did they contribute a lot? Yes. But did they come out of it on top? Absolutely. They become one of the founding members or permanent members of the UN, the Defense Council. So they're one of the permanent members because of that. So they established themselves so prominently that they could not be ignored anymore. And if you look at Russia in general, in the previous years in history, Western society has always kind of never took Russia as a world power. And at that point, Russia is finally a world power at that point, or the Soviet Union, technically, but you know what I mean. So yeah, pretty cool topic. Let's see what we have here for the next one. Today I almost put the peanut butter M&Ms in that, but then I was like, no, I'll probably eat it, so there's no way I could have that on the podcast. Probably be eating them as I talk. But, okay, so the next topic here is going to be what was the number one battleship in World War II and why? And some of y'all are probably going to get mad at this, but just from what I've looked up and the information I could find, and you're going to be like this typical American guy here, I want to say the USS Iowa class was the best battleship in World War II. Now, before you get mad, let's go over the details. 1, gun size. Gun size were very large. There was a lot of them. They had 3 per battery. There was enough guns on it to be considered to me a top-of-the-line battleship and the best. And you could say, well, the Yamamoto had bigger guns. Yes, it did have bigger guns, but it had worse armor. The armor was terrible on it. It was larger, easier to target. And because of those reasons, it was super slow. You compare this top speed of the Yamamoto-class battleship, and you compare that to the Iowa-class battleship. The Iowa-class battleship just outclasses it in every form. It's a more modern battleship. It's probably the closest thing you get to a modern battleship in World War II. And then if you look like UK and Italy and stuff, I'm just sorry to tell you, their battleships were just not up to that point. They just wasn't. And then if you look over at Germany and you look at the Bismarck-class battleship, the Bismarck was a good battleship, I think. It was fantastic. I think that one of the key areas in the Bismarck was the fact that they went with a dual turret design instead of a 3 turret design. Having 2 barrels on each gun emplacement, and with having less guns on the total ship, just kind of made the battleship overall, it just lowered the firepower of it. I feel like if they designed it maybe a little bit differently with 3 barrels, like a lot of other bigger battleships are doing, then the Bismarck would have been up there, definitely on the list. And for smaller seas, I'd say did great. But now open ocean, I just don't think it has the firepower there. So yeah, that's pretty much why I think the USS Iowa class battleship, is it's just overall more balanced. And speed becomes such a large thing because if you have a slow battleship, that means that you're slowing down your fleet. So your smaller ships have to travel at slower speeds, and you can't have. And the ocean's big, but you have to have maneuverability. Because if an enemy knows where you are and you travel really slow, you're not going to make it very far. A lot of naval warfare back then was a lot of knowing to where to hit the enemy before they hit you. And it was being able to get out of where the enemy spotted you at. So just being slow is almost a killer. Plus, it just hurt the rest of your fleet. It makes the rest of your fleet a sitting duck, especially when aircraft became, the naval supremacy kind of pretty much. So yeah, fun little topic. I just kind of want to throw that in there. I'm sure I'm going to receive some... you're wrong about that comments, but let's see what else we can pull out today. Oh, another fun one. I think it's fun. I think this one's fun because personally, before like about a couple years ago, I really learned more about him. But like, I really didn't really like know who was Sir Oswald Mosley. I really didn't know about Mosley, and that's because like really it just wasn't talked about much in history, and he didn't really have a lot to do with it. But it's an interesting side of it because you always hear about the fascist movements in Germany and Italy and even other nations, but you don't ever hear about it in the UK. And it's really odd because like looking at Oswald Mosley's life, it wasn't like if you compare it to the rest of them, like Hitler and Mussolini and stuff like that, they were kind of forced into their position of like politically they were kind of like forced along that path. They really didn't have very many options. And then you run into someone like Oswald Mosley who had tons of options. He grew up in an influential family. He literally knew like every person in their government. He knew Winston Churchill personally. He knew all of these people. He had so many connections, it was unreal. This guy could have they believe if you look at it like if Oswald Mosley would have not have went to the fascist side of things, which I'm going to get more about it here in a minute, if he wouldn't have went that way, he probably would eventually became the prime minister of the UK. I mean, because he was extremely popular. He's a very likable person, a great speech giver. He's very talented. He just went down this odd path. And so pretty much he served in the House of Commons. He served in the labor union. And when he was in the labor union, due to the Great Depression, things like that, he thought of economic policies and things the government could do to help with the unemployment rates and things like that. Well, every idea that he put forward was rejected. The UK government would not support his ideas at all, and it frustrated him because he knew his ideas were right. He knew that this was the correct thing, and maybe he's very stubborn about this, very prideful, and he knew he was right about these changes, and he fully believed that they would have worked in the government, but nobody would take him seriously. Nobody gave him a chance. So he ended up actually creating the Black Shirts, which is a fascist organization, which at one point had about 50,000 members. And it's actually a combination of a bunch of fascist organizations in the UK, like different fascist book clubs and stuff like that. Any smaller groups, they would take them in, they'd count them as this one major group. And the UK was, I mean, they were honestly scared about it. In 1936, they banned political uniforms where you could no longer wear like uniforms. You could no longer be associated with a political party and wear the same uniform together to show it. They banned that. So you couldn't do that out in public because that's what they were doing. I mean, they were dressing out in all black shirts and saluting and showing the fascist movements. And Oswald Mosley really was. I mean, he was doing it, but he was very UK first, but also very European first. He actually talks about later in his life, he talked about how he'd like to see a European nation where all European countries come together as one nation and form to be a global large nation, kind of like the United States, but like a European version of that. So, a really large nation. He had some very lofty ideas. He was friendly. He was on friendly terms with Mussolini. He was very, very close to Adolf Hitler. And so I say the guy's name right. He was married twice. So the first time he was married, his wife passed away. He got married the second time to his mistress. So this was somebody he was already with when he was with his wife. I don't remember the exact name of the disease that killed his first wife, but it was a disease. It wasn't no like foul play or anything too outlandish like that. But Joseph Goebbels, the chief propagandist of the German, German Reich, German army and everything over there in Germany, he actually had his second wedding at his house in Germany, in Berlin, and the guest of honor was Adolf Hitler. So was this guy very connected politically? Yes, like absolutely. Like he did not politically sabotage himself. I mean, he could have. I mean, he could have been. I guess been so great. Like he would have been literally probably one of the most like a very famous person that you read about and heard about today. But because of his political decisions to go toward that party, I mean, it kind of ruined that route. So yeah, I just think Oswald Mosley's really interesting in history. The fact that somebody that has everything given to him in life and had every opportunity to literally he just had to continue down the set path, democracy and everything else, and he would have been a successful politician and had life very well and be remembered very fondly. Instead, he decided to go toward the fastest, the right path, and he really tried to create a lot of things that he was doing it from a good place, though. I will say that. Looking at he did have he did have anti-Semitic views though against Jewish people and things like that. But like the things he wanted to do with the country and Europe in general, a lot of it was not bad ideas. It's just that there were some bad agendas and bad things along with those things. Kind of like the mustache man over in over in Germany. So I mean, there's a lot of connections there. So yeah, hopefully y'all learn more about Sir Oswald Mosley, and this is something you maybe haven't heard a lot about. So yeah, fun little topic. Okay, let's see what we got next. Not a piece of candy. So the North Africa Campaign, Simplified. And the reason why I say Simplified is I tried to give a very detailed account of this, and it's very complex. There's a lot of back and forth in North Africa, like a whole bunch. So the biggest thing you need to know, you might wonder, like, why did the Germans fight in North Africa? Why did Italy fight in North Africa? You know, really basic stuff. And the honest truth is the Suez Canal over toward Egypt. They wanted to control it because that would control trade to the Mediterranean. And on top of that, they would give them access to Middle Eastern oil, which both Italy and Germany desperately needed. So that was the number one important thing. Now, the other simplified version of this is that the North Africa campaign should have been like a very, very fast win for the Italians. And the Italians are just terrible. Like, I read this and I looked at it closely. I just couldn't believe how incompetent the Italian military is in North Africa. So, first off, they outnumber the British right at the start. When they enter the war 9 months after Germany started World War II, and France was like literally was about to fall. They were like, Germany was marching on Paris. Like it was going to fall like any day. I think 10 days later it fell. So that's when Italy started the war. Italy had like 600,000 troops or something in Africa. It was a lot. It was a large number. Or maybe it's 500,000. There was a lot of troops though. And in retrospect of that, the British had like 40,000 troops in Africa. Like there was not very many troops in Africa, especially northern Africa. Like Italy easily could have pushed out of Ethiopia north toward Egypt, and they could have pushed out of Libya east toward Egypt, and easily could have took all this land. Instead, they didn't though. Like they didn't move. They didn't march. They just like, yeah, we're preparing. We're getting ready. We're doing this. We're doing that. When they finally did march, the British at that point, actually, they didn't even march really. The British took the initiative. They marched a little bit, but the British have received some reinforcements. And when they did, like not very much, but the British decided, hey, if the Italians aren't coming, let's take this time and let's start doing, because obviously it's a wide stretch of land. So they started doing raids and stuff, and what it was, they would take the limited armor regiments they had at the time. They would take them and they would raid Italian positions and do a lot of damage and take supplies and things like that. And they would, get out, and they would do it over and over and over. So just harassing the Italian line all up and down, causing damage and everything else. So the Italians were losing. Eventually, as time goes on, the British are receiving more reinforcements, more air power, more tanks. And this stuff coming off, the U.S. is sending them tanks, and it's going from the Italians still outnumber them, but they're just incompetent and terrible and not armed enough, terrible tanks, everything else. The Italians end up getting defeated, especially toward Ethiopia. They lose down there in Eastern Africa, but then toward Libya, they started taking losses. Well, then the Germans come in, aka Rommel comes in, and Rommel's supposed to turn this all around with very limited divisions. The entire Africa campaign, at that point, after they lose Eastern Africa, the UK and British outnumber the Germans and Italians throughout the entire rest of it. So they've lost the opportunity. So now they're trying to find it. And Rommel's a smart man, and Rommel takes what limited division he has, and he starts doing the same thing the British were doing. He starts doing raids. He starts doing lightning quick attacks all across, the northern Africa, trying to win, trying to make some kind of moment where they could have a critical victory, capture a lot of men, things like that. Well, I mean, just the fact of the matter is that the Allies just had too many supplies. They received too many tanks, too many planes, the air superiority. He was always fighting a losing battle. And on top of that, when he would get orders, when he would have an idea to go attack this or this, he'd make plans. Most of the time, Adolf Hitler would override those plans. He'd say, no, attack over here. No, attack. It would ruin his entire strategy. Or when he'd want to attack, he'd be told, no, you need to hold, you need to, reinforce, you need to do this and that and that. I feel bad for the guy. I mean, like, if it would have been an equal footing fight between the Germans and the Italians and the Allies, good chance the Germans would have won. Rommel was a fantastic commander in Africa, probably would have pulled off the W. The Allies had a lot of the same thing going on too. They went through several different commanders in Africa because of the fact that, like, Churchill would get rid of one, or the government would get rid of one because he'd say he'd want to hold position here or attack now and things like that. So there was a lot of the same thing going on, a lot of micromanaging in Africa, but it was such an important area that no one wanted to lose it. So that's why a lot of that was happening. But pretty much what happened was that all of Africa gets taken, but Tunisia, and they get forced back. And eventually Rommel goes back to Europe because it's a lost cause at that point. He gets sick, like that happens conveniently. And he goes back to, Germany to heal up and everything. Well, with Tunisia pretty much getting, taken over eventually, like through a campaign. And then fighting all in there, and I think they captured like 100 something. I don't know. Maybe it might not have been 100,000. Maybe been like 40,000 Italians, but they captured a bunch throughout the entire campaign. Like there was like crap ton of Italians captured. Like I know for a fact it was hundreds of thousands of Italians that were captured in Africa, just in general. But yeah, so the simplified version of the Africa campaign is that Italy's completely terrible militarily in World War II. German commanders constantly overridden by Adolf Hitler, and Germany itself just on orders, limited supply. Allies had a numerical advantage most of the war. The Germans did fantastic for what they accomplished. There was battles where the Germans were outnumbered 1,200 tanks to 300 tanks, and they would still take out 4-1 losses. That's fantastic. You're telling me one tank will destroy 4 enemy tanks before being lost? That's pretty good, but the fact of the matter is, numerically, the Allies had reserves. The Allies had more tanks. They were going to eventually win because even at that odds, through sacrifice and loss, eventually they would win. So yeah, hopefully that simplifies the North Africa campaign a little bit. We do end up winning, and we use that region to scale invasions like into southern Italy and things like that. Let's see what we got here on the next topic list. The Pacific strategy, U.S. versus Japan. So the U.S. strategy in the Pacific against Japan was pretty much after Pearl Harbor. They had massive losses, so they had to be careful. They only had their carriers and they had their submarines mainly. They did have some limited smaller fleet vessels, but carriers and submarines were the biggest thing they had. So their plan was, they had to do a significant damage to the enemy naval force, which they did at the Battle of Midway. They took out some carriers, massive damage, gave that supremacy back to the U.S. On top of that, they started doing the island hopping campaign. They did not want to lose their connection to Australia for trade, so they used Australia as a staging point, and they kind of went up from there, different islands. Oh, New Guinea. Yeah, there we go. Sorry, I couldn't think of it for a second. So they did battles in New Guinea and a bunch of islands across the Pacific. Now, it doesn't mean they went to every island. So what they would do is they would actually sometimes skip over heavily fortified islands and go to the next one. They were aiming for islands with either places they could dock ships or air bases primarily. And their goal was they would keep hopping islands until they get closer and closer to Japan, and they finally get air bases to where they could have their B-26 bombers, and they could bomb B-26. Hope it's B-26. They could bomb Japan from there, because that was their plan. They were going to island hop, get closer, bomb Japan. They were going to have naval supremacy. They were going to use their subs to stop trade. They were literally going to reduce Japan's ability to have war. They were going to make Japan where they couldn't produce goods. They didn't have anything coming in trade-wise. They were going to cripple their economy and their entire island to get the victory. Well, that was the beginning of their strategy, which they kept doing that all through the Pacific. And as they got closer, they realized, man, these guys are fanatical. We're probably going to have to invade them. And that was a terrible idea. They looked at the numbers they thought they would need for the invasion. They looked at the number of casualties they were predicted to take from the invasion and the long-term financial cost of it and everything else, and it was astronomically high. So at that point, the nuclear bombs came into play. They dropped the nuclear bombs. Did the damage it did. They dropped 2 suns. The 2 suns did some damage, scared everyone in Japan. Japan surrendered. They surrendered on the deck of a USS Iowa class battleship, BB-63. The Montana class, or not Montana class, USS Iowa class, but the Montana. So they surrendered on deck of that ship, and bang boom, that was pretty much the entire Pacific strategy. I'm obviously skimming over all of the brutal fighting. Fighting in jungles is rough. Other than just fighting, it's the disease, it's the just unclean conditions, weather changes. You're taking people that are from the US and putting them in tropical environments. Just naturally, people are going to get sick. It's different weather, different everything. It's very hard for the body to get accustomed to that. They're fighting in very dirty conditions, and just even if you look at the Japanese side, like in New Guinea, like the losses they took from disease, it's like 50%. It's high, and there's look at the distance there. So that pretty much wraps up the Pacific strategy and World War II for the United States versus Japan. I think we're on our last topic. I've been kind of planning these out where there's just enough topics for a full episode, or pretty close. Lend-Lease. Let's talk about it. I think I've kind of covered a little bit in the past, but let's go more in depth on it, like kind of like what it is, where it kind of came from, and why we came up with it. So after World War One, man, that was a really loud vehicle. After World War One, the U.S. was very isolationist. The populace was not happy with the losses that we took, overseas, and what they deemed a European conflict, and the hundreds of thousands of losses we took. I mean, it just really scared the nation. No one liked it, and it really gave an isolationist movement in the U.S. That's not our concern. That's overseas. Let's not worry about it. Let's stick to ourselves. Things like that. Well, then as World War II gets closer and Germany becomes more apparent on what its course of action is, and war is getting worse, we start looking at, FDR, Franklin D. Roosevelt, starts looking at trade. He wants to be able to trade with our allies to give them military equipment. So he actually gets it passed to where the government will allow us to sell military weapons and goods and things like that to foreign governments as long as they can pay for it cash, and as long as they can carry it themselves. That came to the cash and carry policy. That means that they could transport the goods on their own ships to their own country, and on top of that, they could pay cash for the goods, so they're paying for them. And as long as they could do that, we could sell goods to them. That's how it started out. And we did that in the beginning for like a while, and then like when the 1940s got here and France fell, Winston Churchill directly appealed to Franklin D. Roosevelt and told them that the gold reserves in the UK are dwindling. Very, very soon, we will not be able to pay cash for the military goods that we're buying. That's when Franklin D. Roosevelt decided that we had to have a better program. And he came up with the idea for the Lend-Lease program, that he would lend and lease out military goods, and payment would be decided upon by the president and what form it took and things like that. So the exact details on it would be decided there. But his biggest thing is that politically and morally, as the American nation cannot afford not to lend and lease our military goods for the protection of our own country, because that's what the UK was doing. They were fighting Germany for us at that point because we were not in the war. They did not want that evil and the fascism and the fascists to come over here to the US. We had to keep that away. So the Lend-Lease program gets passed, and that allows us to trade off goods, pretty much lend it and lease it out for, $1, pennies, whatever Franklin D. Roosevelt decided upon. There was a point where I've seen a couple different numbers. I've seen anywhere from 50 to 100 destroyers to the UK for naval bases and naval and air bases across like the whole world that we can use for rent-free for 100 years. That was one of the deals we made. And there was also some other stuff in there, but we sent a bunch. Like we had $50 billion in aid sent out. And you might think 50 billion, that's not that much. Well, you look at inflation today, and with inflation, it adds up now. It's $933 billion is the value of what we gave up during World War II. So we gave $933 billion of today's money out in foreign aid in the form of tanks, food, medicine, vehicles, anything like this, weapons, just in general. We gave all this out to foreign nations. And you might think, oh man, what nations got the most? Well, the UK received the most of it. And there's a reason why for that. So we gave out 30 billion in aid to the US to the UK, and we gave out 11 billion to the USSR. We gave out a bunch to the USSR because they were fighting such a crucial part, and we gave out a bunch to the UK because they've been fighting Germany the longest, and they needed it, honestly. Like, the UK from Dunkirk and France, they lost most of their military equipment. They lost like a bunch. They were very, very ill-equipped for World War II at that point. So we sent over a bunch of military equipment to replenish that. And in return to that, I will say this: the UK gave us a bunch of technological advancements, plastic explosives, the most advanced radar technology in the world at the time, the jump start toward the nuclear program with that partnership, and many, many more things. They gave a bunch of technological advancements to us, So there was a lot of give and take there, and that has a value that value may, like, I guess, be even more valuable than the amount we gave them. But the fact of the matter is, they need it. And did we set ourselves up for after World War II to be in a position of power? Absolutely, we did. But without the Lend-Lease program, a lot of these nations would have fell. I mean, everyone wants to say, oh, the Lend-Lease wasn't that important. If the gold reserves ran completely out in the UK and they couldn't buy equipment, do you think they would have continued to fight war? Do you think that whenever they can't receive, when people go to their grocery store and they can't buy bread anymore, do you think that they would want to fight war? The answer is probably not. I mean, I wouldn't want to fight war. I mean, that's the thing. I hate to say it, but people need certain necessities in their life, and people were simpler back then, but you compare that to today, you start taking away these things that people receive on the daily. If you say, hey, there's no food today, you'll have to wait another day to eat. Hey, you're gonna have to at least make it 2 or 3 days without food or water, and we'll get that food and water to you. Things like that in a war, that's whenever nations start considering surrender, because they start looking at the livelihood of their citizens who they're there to protect. And that's when they start, thinking about, maybe it'd be better if we just surrendered. Maybe it'd be better if we ended this war. That way we could save our people. So the Lend-Lease, crucially important. And without it, World War II would have been a lot different. Other side note, not really a topic, but like FDR was just honestly a really great president. I would say he's one of my favorite presidents of all time. He was the only president to be nominated for 4 terms. So he was chosen 4 different times to be president. He actually, whenever he got elected before World War II to be president, he was elected on the term that he would keep America out of the war. And even with them just going into the war, people still loved him for it. He did the fireside chats over the radio. 90% of Americans had radios in their homes at that time, and he knew that. And he would do, like, I think he did 30-something fireside chats during his, like, time in office, and they were all, like, super personal. And it really, the way he connected with the nation is really what helped the nation get ready for war. Now, obviously, Japan bombing Pearl Harbor helps. It kind of helped everyone riled up, but in the heart and emotionally, everyone was kind of ready to help out. They were starting to see Europe not as their conflict, but as our problem, our conflict. So yeah, I want to tell everybody thank you for hopping in for episode 6 of the Weekly History Chaos podcast. If y'all would, please give me a review on here, like this, anything you can, share it to your friends. My TikTok channel, DASSBear, DASSBEAR. My email, if you want to get out to me to talk about topics, or if you want to guest on the show, is jdcarson. So jdcarson93@gmail.com. Or that's my Yahoo as well. So if you want to reach out to me and email me about being a guest, or if you have topic ideas, please do. So yeah, I'm on YouTube, TikTok, anything like that. Just please follow me. Please leave a good review on this if you liked it. If you don't like it, then leave a bad review and tell me about it, because obviously that helps me do a better job. In general, And honestly, lately, I've had a really hard problem with censorship. So hopefully, with me saying keywords on here, it doesn't make a difference. But I've had a couple of videos taken down on TikTok due to censorship, or, well, pretty much I'll upload a video and they'll flag it for hate speech, and it's not. If you've listened to me talk about anything on here, I try to talk about things in a way that's very unbiased or very my opinion, but not in a way that's bigoted or anything like that. I try to be very open about these things. I try to see both sides of every story. So yeah. But other than that, y'all have a great week, great weekend, and I will see you back here for episode 7. Y'all have a good one.